Welcome to the War Report. This is our video on the top 10 American war movies. Coming in at number 10, we have the early 90s film Gettysburg. And the reason why we chose it is because I believe it shows both sides, the Confederacy and the Union, fairly equally. In the battle, it swung things in favor of the Union and kept Robert E. Lee from advancing onto Washington and becoming the great big boogeyman, as he had defeated so many Union generals that it had gotten silly by this point. But General George Meade's defense, his fish line hook defense, proved to be Robert E. Lee's last invasion into the North, and filled with lots of Civil War reenactors, and they demanded that it be done right. And so, you see men that know what they're doing, they're dressed right, they act right. The cannons are a little quieter as they're firing blanks, but we do see some key points in the film, such as the unintentional beginning of the battle where Union cavalry meets the forward part of A.P. Hill's army and defends the town of Gettysburg. And they keep the fire up and are relieved finally. It just really shows the battles, and then the next day, shows it day by day. And then the next day is the end of the line, where the Union line ends, running out of ammunition and have to make a swinging door charge with their bayonets and force the weakened Confederate attack and soldiers into surrendering and saving the day for the Union, as there is no one left on their flank to prevent the Confederates from making a breakthrough in the fish hook line defense. And on the third day is the infamous General Pickett's charge with his division going across like a football field, basically, or maybe longer, in an infantry charge that harpers back to the days of Napoleon warfare, where they'd show their martial prowess by walking and even had to jump a fence in between, as the Union guns had caught their pace and were doing damage. General Pickett is quoted to Robert E. Lee asking him telling him that he must go to his division, and General Pickett says, "I have no division, sir." So that's why I think it's a good American war movie, as it shows, key points of the 3 days of the battle, including coming in at number 9, we have The Thin Red Line, a World War II film directed by Terrence Malick, known for his visually stunning films. This film takes place on the island of Guadalcanal, and the first real American army engagement against Imperial Japanese armies, and then through narrations speaking in their head of what they're going through and what they miss back home. A captain that doesn't want to lead his men up to just be cannon fodder, as a position, has his men pinned down, and the colonel wants to push, as this is his war. He really wants to make general, and he's telling the captain that this is his war, he's got time to make general, but he's got to get that position dealt with. Then the colonel finally comes up because the captain refuses to waste his men. And then when the colonel gets up there, the situation has changed. So they send up a party of just a few men to take it, and they end up doing it. The captain's relieved of his command. Someone is not going to be indecisive and be super caring for their men over taking direct orders, as that would break down the machine and cause more casualties in the end. It's really nicely filmed. I'd highly recommend you see it. It came out the same year as Saving Private Ryan, which is probably the only thing that kept it from getting Best Picture at the Oscars. Coming in at 8, we have Hacksaw Ridge. Similar in the fact that he's sort of like the captain, doesn't want to see men die or kill men, and he just wants to be a medic and save lives of men that have been wounded in battle. And it brings up a big controversy where he gets a court-martial, but his dad comes to bat for him in his World War I uniform with medals for the battles he was at. And so he gets to be a medic and not carry a rifle, and he really shows that it paid off, that they made the choice to let him just be a medic and do what he wants to do, as he saved countless lives as the Japanese counterattacked. And at the end of it, he managed to save himself, as he was pretty beat up and wounded. So that's why he comes in at number 8. At number 7, we have American Sniper, the story of the sniper, the Navy SEAL sniper Chris Kyle. Some call it an anti-war movie, others call it a pro-war movie, and it's directed by Clint Eastwood. Now, I firmly believe this is a anti-war movie, as you can see the PSD and the changes Chris goes through, where he can't even go home first when he comes back from Iraq and has to go to a bar and have a few drinks before he sees his family that he loves. And he catches his brother leaving Iraq as well, and his brother basically just says, fuck this place. And he sees that there's been a big change in both of them, as, you know, his little brother would do whatever he would do. And so he joins the Marines, while Chris is a Navy SEAL sniper, an elite, and everyone knows him basically for what he's done. There's been uproar about his book, maybe lying or embellishing stories, to the point where he got into a fight with former Navy SEAL Jesse Ventura and punched him out, and they ended up suing the estate of Chris Kyle, as he'd been killed. He had dealt with his PTSD by helping others, you know, that were wounded or whatever, go to shooting ranges and shoot and talk and, you know, be the boys, kind of a locker room thing that most athletes miss. And while this helps him and the other men deal with their PTSD, the last man that he goes to help, his PTSD gets the better of him, and he shoots himself and Chris Kyle. And the movie ends on a tragic note like that, as America loses one of its best snipers. Coming in at 6, we have Apocalypse Now, directed by the famous Godfather series director Francis Ford Coppola, among other films. In this, he tells a lot of the Vietnam stories through an old book from the turn of the century about rubber and slaves, and how one man has gone far up the river and is kind of playing God with these people. And in this book, an officer that's highly decorated and was being groomed for the top saw the war very differently from the way it was fought, and knew his strategy was better, as he had interference of Vietnamese activity in his sector by having a trial of 3 agents and shooting them. So the army sees him as a rogue, as he's kind of gone upriver himself into a different country, and he's going around playing God, fighting the enemy still actively, and has seen the war for what it's really about. And Machine, sees that you know, he's actually probably right, and he finds out that another man had been sent up and had told his wife to sell the house, sell the car, and that he's never coming home. And then when he finally gets to the man after they've lost a few men in the boat and have been part of an attack in a famous scene with Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries playing, where they attack a village that they need to get past in order to drop the boat to go further into a different country. I believe it's Laos. Coppola shows all parts of the Vietnam War from, what the PT boats or the small upriver and downriver boats would do to play chicken with each other. And the USO shows, and then the last base line and how there's no officers there. They've kind of left their men to fight. And it's just a mess. And so the extended version, the director's cut even shows French colonists, as Vietnam was a French colony from the late 1800s, and Vietnam's true enemy has always been China. But it shows these colonists that have obviously been there for a few generations, and they see it as their home. And so they have a few soldiers left over. The Americans had trained the Viet Minh, which became the Viet Cong, in World War II to fight the Japanese that had taken control of Vietnam from the French, Vichy, as Hitler's puppet state, the Vichy, couldn't deny a request of one of Hitler's allies. So Vietnam fell into Japanese hands, and they kind of saw that, an Asian country could take over from a white-powered country. And so the Viet Minh became the Viet Cong, and after World War II, the Americans thought that the French, it would be best if they took back Vietnam. So the first Indochina War was in the 1950s with the French versus the Vietnamese, with the French being financed and equipped by the Americans, while the now Viet Cong were being financed by China and Russia, with even some Soviet pilots flying MiGs. It's a really good story. I definitely recommend the director's cut. Coming in at number 5 is the classic from director Steven Spielberg, Saving Private Ryan. A 20-minute battle at the beginning, D-Day at Omaha Beach. I saw it in theaters as a junior high kid, and I was really into, war, and it made me rethink ever becoming a soldier, as it just seemed so real from anything else I'd seen before. And that, you don't simply fall over with no blood when you get hit. You see men crying for mama with their, holding their guts that are protruding out. And, a guy picks up his arm totally in shock. The Germans are just blasting the guys away with MG-42s in fortified bunkers, and then finally they find a breach and toast the Germans. And then from there, it gets a little bit too much of artistic liberty, as they are forced to take a fake town, as the man they went to go find and save, Private Ryan, doesn't want to leave the only brothers he has left, as he lost 4 brothers basically in the same week, so they didn't want his mother to lose another. In the Civil War, I believe, a mother had lost all their sons in the Union Army, so they wanted that to never happen again. So that's what the mission was based on. And coming in at number 4, we have Patton, based on Patton's life during World War II as a excellent tank commander at the Army level and the divisional level first in North Africa. He takes on another excellent tank commander, Erwin Rommel, a field marshal. He's read Rommel's book, so he knows basically what Rommel's going to do, and he beats him. And, there were German Africa Corps wasn't really getting a lot of reinforcements as the big battle was in Russia, so the Americans eventually pushed them out all the way to Tunisia and made a landing at Sicily, and he did a great job there again. I think he beat Montgomery to the main objective, and then again invaded mainland Italy and got them out of the war. But the Germans took up positions in front of Rome, and after slapping 2 soldiers, Patton was dismissed and put in control of a fake dummy army that was intended to fool the Germans into thinking that one of their best generals was going to land at Pas-de-Calais instead of the Normandy landings, which worked. And then he found himself in northwest Europe. His tank army helped relieve the men at Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, even though the Easy Company said they never needed help to be relieved. There had been huge losses, and that ended Hitler's attack against the Allies. He ended up very close to Berlin. He wanted to take it, but the Supreme Allied Commander, Ike Eisenhower, told him they were going to give it to the Russians due to the amount of men and women and civilians they'd lost. And so at the end of the movie, he dies in a car accident, and there's a bit of a conspiracy about that, but doesn't really go into it in the movie too much. Again, at number 3 is Black Hawk Down, directed by Ridley Scott. And it's a really realistic movie that tells the true story of early 1993 issues in the Civil War going on in Somalia, where people were starving to death because food was being hoarded by warlords. And so Delta Force and Rangers go on a mission to get some of his top men, and they succeed. But then 2 Black Hawk helicopters are shot down by RPGs, and they have to move to those to destroy the technology and also get the crews out. At one of the positions, everyone's dead except for one of the pilots, and the 2 Delta Force snipers land and volunteer to take care of him and wait until reinforcements can come. At the other helicopter, they couldn't move the wounded men, so they had to do a medevac inside the helicopter until the men were good enough to move. So again, Rangers had to bring their Humvees there and secure every corner. And the fighting that was supposed to only last like an hour or so ended up going into the next day. And it really shows, what the men through and how they died horribly. And really, Scott really shows you what can happen in limited warfare without nuclear weapons involved. And then coming in at number 2, we have the great Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket, another Vietnam movie. But this one's unique in that it shows the first half training camp of draftees mostly, and maybe some volunteers getting their heads shaved in the first scene. And then Gunnery Sergeant, played by R. Lee Ermey, and Private Pile, played by Vincent D'Onofrio, really take the show as Gunnery Sergeant. He just comes up with so many great one-liners to the troops to break them down into, one cohesive unit, regardless of their skin color. And Private Pile just can't get it right. Most likely, he's one of McNamara's morons that was a plan to make people with low IQs help to society and earn their place in having a citizenship in America. But there's stories of, a lieutenant having to help one guy tie his boots, and we see Private Joker help Private Pyle with his putting his gun back together and placing his kit and folding his bed properly. One night, after the gunnery sergeant finds a donut in his footlocker, he makes everyone else do push-ups and walk around Private Pyle as he eats the donut on top of his footlocker and sucks his thumb. And then they beat him that night with soap bars tied in socks. And Joker hits him the most at the end and feels bad for it because he bunks just below Pyle and can hear him. And then after they're assigned their duties, Joker is a combat correspondent, so he joins Stars and Stripes. His friend Private Cowboy is infantry, and Private Pyle has become an excellent shooter and gets some praise from Gunnery Sergeant, is assigned to the infantry as well. But you can see this devious, evil look on his face at times. And Private Joker draws Night Watch, the final night, and finds Private Pyle in the head with a loaded M13, and he gets the attention of the gunnery sergeant, and the gunnery sergeant starts mouthing him off again, and he ends up shooting the gunnery sergeant dead, and then sits down on a toilet, turns the weapon on himself, and blows his brains out. And then we cut to the second part of the film where Private Joker has a new friend in Raptor Man, another combat correspondent, and they've been in country for some time and are approached by a prostitute. And then the Tet Offensive occurs where the Vietnamese and Viet Cong from the north break the Tet Offensive ceasefires that have happened every year hence until that point. And it's made a lot of Americans, including Walter Cronkite, believe the war is now unwinnable. So every American at base was attacked by certain numbers of units. Even the American embassy in Saigon was attacked by 13 commandos who were all killed. But they did enter the building, and then our characters are all sent to Hawaii City, where there's been a bunch of action, and he gets reconnected with his buddy from boot camp, Private Cowboy, who's now part of a certain squad, and so he joins up with them as part of Private Stars and Stripes, and one by one the guys kill the enemy and then get killed by the enemy, either by booby traps or a sniper. Private Joker ends up sneaking up on the sniper, but can't fire his gun and gets shot at. But then Raptor Man comes to his safety and blows away. The sniper is only a young girl, but she's still alive and wants water, and Private Joker finishes her off. Great movie. It shows you, a lot of what the men went through getting to Vietnam, and then what they went through once they got there, including prostitutes driven to them, just sitting, waiting for orders to come out. And excellent movies. Kubrick made a masterpiece. And the gunnery sergeant, played by Arlie Ermey, and Private Pyle, played by Vincent D'Onofrio, really, really drove the movie hard. And then Matthew Modine, who played Private Joker, really finished the second half hard. Coming in at number 1, we have Platoon, directed by an actual Vietnam soldier by Oliver Stone, who in a 1990 interview based on people who grew up in the 60s and what the 60s are all about, said that he was at university but he couldn't think anymore, he couldn't study, he just felt like he needed some adventure, and he thought that Southeast Asia was a good idea, so he signed up as a private in the Marine Corps, and the movie's kind of based on his own experiences. His basic experience, played by Charlie Sheen, who plays a character called Chris, and he, meets and greets his platoon and finds out what Vietnam is like on his first patrol as he falls asleep. And, first he wakes up the guy that's going to take the next watch and then falls asleep. Then he hears noise and wakes up and fails to click his claymore. And somebody fires the machine. Another FNG guy that he arrived with is dead and dying. And so the sergeant that is kind of the bad guy, the antagonist, makes the guy that should have been on watch carry the body bag. And the nice sergeant helps Chris out with his wound and tells him what he needs and doesn't need, as he faces the really humid heat of the jungle and gets put on point for patrols and has no idea what it's doing as he walks right in front of a Vietnamese bunker that he doesn't see and was just recently avoided. So he could have easily been shot and killed and didn't even know it. That just would have been it for him. So the Americans expect it, and two of the antagonist sergeant's friends get blown up by a booby trap trying to find information that's useful. And the good sergeant goes down into tunnels and shoots a couple of Vietnamese and comes back out, and they realize he's lost a soldier, and they find him, and they're all mad, and they see one VC running away, and the antagonist sergeant gets him from probably like 100 yards away, picks him off, and then they go to a village and just take their anger out on the village. Some men try to rape a young girl. They're finding weapons. Chris is in a hut with a smiling, one-legged, probably used to be in the VC, but is just now like a on-the-shelf warrior that can't fight anymore. And in their culture, smiling is a way of showing that you're nervous, and it freaks Chris out. And so he starts making him dance by shooting around him. And the guy's hopping, and then another character, Bunny, comes in with a shotgun and uses the bus to smash his face in right in front of his mother. And the antagonistic sergeant brings out like the main head of the family and points his gun at the village leader's wife and asks where the VC are. And the guy's pleading with him not to, and then he shoots the wife right in front of the daughter and him. And then while the lieutenant should be running the platoon, he's just letting the antagonistic sergeant run it. And it's causing problems because the guy's just fighting the war on the way he wants to. After serving a few tours of duty, the good sergeant sees this, comes out and hits the antagonistic Sergeant Barnes, and they get in a fight. The good sergeant says he's going to put him up for charges, and that's the end of him. So that worries the hell out of the Sergeant Barnes, the antagonistic sergeant. And basically it comes down to they're both kind of fighting for Chris's, the main character's soul. Is he gonna go with the bad guys that worship Sergeant Barnes, the antagonist, or is he gonna be one of the heads that hangs out with the good sergeant, played by Willem Dafoe, who actually gets shot on a mission by Sergeant Barnes, the antagonistic sergeant, played by Tom Berenger, and the only one to figure it out is Chris, and he tells the other heads. And a drunken Sergeant Barnes comes in and threatens them all and says, "Come on, shoot me, kill me, do what you want to do." And he can see the anger in Chris's eyes, and he challenges him, and Chris goes at him. And then Barnes pulls a knife out and gives him a little cut as a reminder. And then they have to go on a big mission because they expect a big Vietnamese night attack, and their foxholes are spread pretty thin. And one guy gets out because his duty is up, 1 year tour is up, and he's super happy. And he was kind of also a mentor to Chris and kind of introduced him to marijuana and a way to chill out and have fun in the craziness and chaos of the combat that they face. So Chris is left there at night and fights Some others pretend to play dead. Others are killed and wounded. And Chris looks for Sergeant Barnes, and they face off. And Barnes is about to kill him, but an American airstrike comes in, and cut to the next day where Chris is looking with an AK for the sergeant and sees him kind of just laying there wounded, and kind of eggs on Chris that he doesn't have the balls to shoot him, but Chris blows him away, and he's wounded from the night before. So he ends up getting out of the war, gets to go home because of it. One of his friends in the head is checking a dead VC for information, but finds a big heroin, which is something that they would use for painkillers if they're wounded, and something also the Americans would use for recreational or the same purposes of if shot, there's no morphine available, they just use heroin, which is a bit stronger than morphine, but it comes from the same drug family from poppies. So, you can't really beat a movie directed by someone that was there and saw all the chaos of Vietnam and saw the goodness of some people and the animals and monsters that were brought out in others. And so, so luckily his soul was saved by Willem Dafoe, the good sergeant in the end, and he'll never forget him, but he knows the world will always have changed him. So that's the top 10 list of movies